Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav taught that the deepest parts of ourselves can't be put into words. And when we sing a melody over and over, that melody becomes the vessel that transcends words. Keep it going till people learn it. Vayihi achar hadvarim ha'ele, and it was after these things, Vanisa Elohim et Avram, and God tested Avraham. Vayomer elav, and said to him, Avraham, Abraham. Vayomer hineni, and he said, here I am. Kachna et bincha hayechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak. Take your son, your only one, the one you love, Isaac. V'lech lecha, and you shall surely go. El ha-Moriah, to Moriah. V'haleu Allah, and you will place him there as an offering. We don't hear Abraham's response. What we gain is action. The next morning early, Abraham saddles his donkey, and with that son, Isaac, and 2 servants, sets off. The text resonates with silence. We do not know what Abraham said to Sarah. We do not know what Abraham said to Isaac. We do not know what Abraham said to himself. This Abraham, willing to take his son in this morning's Torah reading, v'yishlach et yadav, and he will raise his hand, v'yakach et ma'achelet, and he will take the knife that consumes, lishchot et bano, to slaughter his son. We're not told why. And it's all the more tense, all the more confounding, because this same man, this servant of God, only a few chapters earlier, had heard that God was going to destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah due to its Hamas, due to its wanton violence. And Abraham would say to God, Chalila lecha, shame on you. Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat? Would the judge of the whole world not do justly? What if there were 50 righteous people in that city? Would you destroy it? Lots of silences. God says, okay, for 50, I will save the wicked. And Abraham, our negotiator-in-chief, says, what about 45? If there were 45 righteous, would you destroy the entire city? All right. And he will get it down to 10. Abraham, who will say in that same conversation, Efer va'afar anochi, I am only dust and ashes, and yet will have the ultimate human chutzpah to challenge God and to say, how could you act unjustly? And for God to concede, although ultimately to destroy the city because they wouldn't find even the 10. Here this morning, God said to Abraham, kill me your son. And Abe said, man, you must be putting me on. God said, no. Abe said, what? God says, you can do what you want, Abe, but the next time you see me, you better run. Abe says, all right, God, where you want this killing done? God says, out on Highway 61. Highway 61 revisited. Leonard Cohen, on the eve of this holiday, just a week ago, released a new song on the Akeda, How Dark Can It Get? With a choir in the background, a Montreal Chazan and his choir singing Hineni, Here I Am. This story evokes confusion. Man, you must be putting me on. So Bob Dylan understands this moment. This moment for the three monotheistic religions defines in their interpretation the essence of what it means to be religious. In 19 verses, out of all those thousands of verses in the Torah, today's Torah reading is chosen by the rabbis. It's chosen by the early rabbis probably for a concept called Zechut Avot, the merit of our ancestors. The paragraph that we read immediately after the Akeda, the angel, a second angel, says to Abraham, V'lo chasachta et bincha, it is now apparent that you have not withheld your son from God. You shall be blessed. We read in a traditional Siddur this story every morning. Talk about a wake-up. Right after Birchat HaShachar, right after the blessings of dawn, we read this story in its entirety, 19 verses, and then the text says, as Abraham was able to withhold his mercy to do your will, may you, God, display your mercy and overcome any anger you may have toward us. And so, why is this read this morning? On the first level, it's read because Abraham displayed such faith in God that he was willing to sacrifice that which was most precious. Did not. God said, do not. But his willingness is our merit. On this Yom Hadin, on this day of judgment, we stand before God benefiting from the merit of our ancestors. Likewise, in Christian theology, this is the pinnacle moment of faith in the Bible. The great Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard would say that Abraham's ability to suspend the ethical and to take a leap of faith made him a knight of faith. That this is the demonstration of what it means. Although in earlier Christian theology they would say that Abraham, who was spared the need to kill his son, was outdone later by God, who would take his son for others. In Islam, in the Quran, there is also this story, but there's an ambiguity. It just says Abraham placed his son on the altar. It doesn't say which of his sons. In the Hadith, which is kind of like our Midrash - Talmud, in the Muslim tradition, it will say it was his oldest son. It was Yishmael. The word Islam means submission, and this is the consummate moment of submission before the master of the universe. And so on the first reading, this is a test of Abraham's faith that Abraham passes. Elie Wiesel will refer to those who died as Jews in World War II as the Holocaust. Do you know that it was he who coined the term Holocaust? The word Holocaust is from this story. La'alot, make of Isaac an olah, a burnt offering. That's the definition of a Holocaust, that which is a burnt offering. He defined those who perished as having sanctified their lives, Kedushat Hashem, sanctified on behalf of God, that he sought to elevate their deaths and called that Holocaust. Interestingly, it's only after World War II, only after the Holocaust, that we get a different reading of this story. Milton Steinberg, the great rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, he says Abraham failed the test. What's the proof? After this moment, God in the Torah never speaks to Abraham again. Moreover, Abraham never speaks to his sons again in the Torah. In fact, when Abraham leaves the mountain, he does not leave with his son. It's not clear as to what is the breach in their relationship. Milton Steinberg says that Abraham would hear a call to slaughter his son was the test, that the God that he believed in did not believe in human sacrifices. And when he tied up his son and he took that knife over his throat and the angel had to stop him, he failed. Breached, ended that relationship. That's a post-Holocaust reading. Rabbi Harold Kushner has a new book called 9 Essential Things I've Learned in Life. And he has a different reading that I hadn't seen before of the Akedah. He sees the Akedah as Abraham's test of God, and God passed. A little bit more. For Rabbi Harold Kushner, most famous for his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, that book about his son Aaron, who died from progeria, a inherited disease in which you age, in which Rabbi Kushner said, as his son was suffering and dying, he said, I can't pray to a God that would cause my son, who did nothing to deserve this. Either God is all-powerful and pathological, or is limited in power, perhaps by choice, limited in power and is caring. Only that God can I worship. Rabbi Harold Kushner points to chapter 15, verse 6, in which Abraham heard God's first Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha me'artzecha muladecha mi'beit avicha ela aretz asher ar'eka. Go for your sake from your land, your birthplace, your father's house, the land that I will show you. That's the first test. In the Akedah, Lech Lecha appears as an echo. This is understood as the 10th and final test of Abraham. When Abraham gets to the promised land, he and his infertile wife still have no children. And a chapter later, he will say to God, there is nothing that I have no one to give over what I have created. I will have to give over all my possessions to my servant. He will inherit from me. And God says, my promise is still good. Give me the benefit of the doubt. You will yet have children. And then he will show him the stars in the sky, and he will says they will be so plentiful you won't be able to count them. And then there's a verse. Ve'amanta b'Adonai, and he believed in God. Ve'aminu lo b'tzedakah, and his faithfulness was accounted to him as good. It's not clear who the low is, if it's to God or to Abraham. But as Rabbi Kushner writes, what was Abraham's relationship with God? His relationship with God is even when things were uncertain, even in darkest moments, he trusted in God. He gave God the benefit of the doubt. And when that promise was fulfilled and God tested Abraham, Abraham tested God, saying, God, you made a promise to me. I don't believe that you really are going to want me to go through with this. God, I'm waiting for you to call it off. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. And sure enough, God calls it off. And Rabbi Harold Kushner, for him, this is the central teaching of Judaism. That in life, when you feel that things are dark, maintain faith. Give God the benefit of the doubt that things will work out, not yet, but later. And that it is our responsibility to be God's partners to make sure that those promises of a world that is at peace, a world that is whole, will yet be fulfilled, because that too was God's promise. So that Akedat Yitzchak is the most, where the rubber meets the road. It's the tough moment in which faith is tested and in which Abraham says, I give God the benefit of the doubt that things even in darkness will later turn to light. But he adds in a paragraph, caution, don't try this at home. God may not have made the same promises to you. There are no assurances that if you have been good, all will necessarily go well for you. And I read that paragraph and I was a little troubled. It's like those car ads, right? With the stunt drivers. Don't try this at home. This is a professional at work. I was troubled because when I read the Torah, I read the story as my story. I read the story as is the nature of Midrash, as where is the Abraham that I am in that story? There's an elegant description of what makes religion worthwhile for Rabbi Kushner. Give God the benefit of doubt. But don't try this at home. Well, that's only a commercial. So I have another way to read the text. A way to read it for me that reflects maybe the times in which we live. Why did Abraham not argue with God? And more, why did Abraham hear a voice that said, take your son and slaughter him? My take is psychological. Abraham lives at a time in which the sacrifice of children is not uncommon. Not only in Israel, but around the world. Those images of the virgin girl being thrown into the volcano in Hawaii and elsewhere is not just an image. That was indeed a not uncommon way that people tried to cultivate favor with powers greater than them. Offer up that which is most dear to you and show that more than your need is your sacrifice on behalf of God. Abraham is living in a place in which there is human sacrifice. And my reading is, he has longed for this son with his beloved Sarah. Finally, a miracle. The child is in the world, and now he is uncertain. Who do I love? Do I love God, or do I love this newborn? What's more precious to me? And it gnaws at him because his neighbors demonstrate their fealty, their commitment, by offering up their newborn, their firstborn. And so he hears this voice. And the voice says, Abraham, offer up your firstborn. firstborn with Sarah, the one you love, show that you love me. And somehow, amid silence, he takes that son, Isaac, places him and ties him down. That too is in the description, and brings up the knife. When in the nick of time, he stops. The way I read the story is that what motivates him is his own ego, his own vulnerability, his own sense of needing to prove his love for God the way that people prove their God in the world in which he lives, with the greatest of offerings. But in the nick of time, he becomes aware that that's not the God he worships. In the nick of time, he becomes aware that that is vile to the God who is the God of justice. Some say that this is the first time that there is a religious text that outright declares, I do not want your human offerings, an image that will persist as the ultimate offering. Do not slaughter that boy. Do not even blemish him, the angel will say. This reading strikes me in which people hear God's voice telling them to explode them. And that is the evil. God, who is the parent of all, it cannot be the God of goodness. All the more living in this time, I read the story of Akedah and I recoil to a God who would be worshipped, who demands slaughter of a son, slaughter of an innocent. I read that story as Abraham's initial failure to separate out the true voice of God from the cultural overlay of ego-driven, vulnerable proofs of one's goodness. But this story at the center of the Torah is not just about them. It is not just about him, Abraham. It's all of our story on Yom Hadin. The hardest part in life is to know what is the true voice of God. What is it within us, at that deepest part of us, that is the voice of goodness, that transcends our own ego, vulnerable, self-serving, rationalizing needs? I am astounded at times. It's easier to see in others the ability to rationalize bad behavior. But it's what I always do, without pausing to reflect on context, on the needs of a moment, on seeing the world from somebody else's point of view rather than one's own self-serving needs. That's how we're constructed, and naturally so. We have to be, as Hillel says, Im ein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? It is important to take care of ourselves in order to be strong, in order to be loving. But the hard part, the elusive part, is being able to separate again out what is the voice that is giving us permission to engage in expedient, self-serving behavior versus what's really right. Some people refer to perspective as seeing ourselves from the balcony. That if we can be in a difficult decision-making moment and we can take ourselves to the balcony and see our situation from above the moment, from above our own needs, we can see ourselves more clearly. That's good advice. The religious challenge is far, far greater. It's not to see ourselves just from a balcony. It's to see ourselves from a perspective, as the Bible will describe it, in which a caring creator parent created all of us. And from that perspective of a parent, what does a parent want for his or her family? First, health. That everyone should be healthy. Two, that everyone should get along. that the kids don't fight. Nothing pains a parent more than seeing a child hit another child. What does a parent want? That when a child falters, that child knows they can do better and has the self-confidence to get up and feel beloved and start again. The laws of the Bible are revolutionary. Every 7 years, debts are to be canceled. Every 50 years, land is to revert. People are to live with the possibility of new beginnings because God up here wants all God's children to live with hope. The opposite of depression, where you feel boxed in as if there's no difference tomorrow will make, is to know that tomorrow can be different. That's what a caring parent seeks. And so the religious quest, and this story is at the core, is indeed at the core, is to know which voices we hear are the true voice of that God and which are our own self-serving, static. That is the work of Yom Hadin. This is our Torah reading for today, to ask the big question: what is the perspective with which we ultimately see the value of our own lives? Which voice do we listen to? This story is at the center of all the monotheistic faiths. It's generating new songs as we speak. This story remains within our tradition as a source of us to know that the voice of God transcends words, that the voice of God is the source of calling for goodness. This is the melody. Die, 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 Ribono Shalom, Master of the Universe, Torah, Hora, Mora. Torah has the same root as teacher and parent. May our Torah be accepted by us as indeed the words of a loving parent, and may we feel beloved, enabling us to hear your true voice, rising above our own immediate needs, to hear and see and experience the world through your eyes and through your embrace, a world yearning for peace, wholeness, and justice. And we say, Amen. In a moment, we will rise for the repetition of the Amidah, but a commercial break. In the book that you can find on either side is this booklet that I put together in order for the conversations of what is the meaning of Torah. How do we read Torah? Why is the Torah a sacred text? To be a conversation we have with our loved ones. And so for those willing to engage in 5 conversations with a friend over 5 weeks, I invite you to accept this gift. You'll find them on either entryway as an opportunity to continue to grow Jewishly and to answer the foundational question in leading a life of significance: why does Judaism matter?